What if I told you that America's funniest woman was hiding the most heartbreaking secret of her life? For over 30 years, Phyllis Diller drove to the same place every single week. Her millions of fans never knew where she went or why. Inside those walls was someone she loved more than anyone else in the world, someone whose condition was so painful that she could never, ever talk about it on stage. When those visits finally stopped in 1993, that's when her real heartbreak began. Today, we're going to uncover the secret that Phyllis Diller kept hidden from the world. A secret that explains why she never stopped working, even when her own heart literally stopped beating. This is a story about love, sacrifice, and the incredible strength of a mother who turned her deepest pain into the laughter that touched millions of lives. Phyllis Marie Driver was born on a summer day in 1917 in Lima, Ohio. Right from the start, her life was different from other kids. Her parents were much older than most parents back then. Her father, Perry, was 55 years old, and her mother, Frances, was 36. That might not sound like a big deal today, but in 1917, having older parents meant something very specific for little Phyllis. She grew up surrounded by death and funerals. While other children were afraid of scary stories or monsters under the bed, Phyllis became strangely comfortable with dark and serious topics. This unusual childhood would later become the secret ingredient in her comedy. She learned early that sometimes the best way to deal with scary or sad things is to find a way to laugh about them. When Phyllis was just 10 years old, something amazing happened. She was accepted into the Sherwood Music Conservatory in Chicago. This was a huge deal because she was so young and so talented at playing piano. By the time she was 22, she was playing professionally with orchestras. She was incredibly gifted, but then she made a decision that shocked everyone who knew her. She quit music completely. Why would someone so talented give up their dream? Phyllis later said she realized she would never be as good as her teachers, and that painful truth made her walk away from the piano forever. Little did she know that giving up music would lead her to something even more amazing. The 1930s brought the Great Depression, and Phyllis's family lost almost everything. She had to sell newspapers on street corners just to help her family survive. These tough times built a strong shell around her heart, but instead of making her bitter, they made her funnier. She started making up stories and jokes to get through the hard days. In 1939, Phyllis got married to a man named Sherwood Diller. She was 22 years old and thought she was starting a beautiful love story. She had no idea she was about to spend the next 26 years pretending everything was perfect when it really wasn't. Sherwood had serious problems. He was afraid to leave the house because of a condition called agoraphobia, and he refused to keep steady jobs. This meant that Phyllis had to work multiple jobs just to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. She wrote for newspapers, edited articles, and did whatever she could to survive while raising their children. Their first child, Peter, was born in 1940. But in 1945, something terrible happened that would haunt Phyllis for the rest of her life. She gave birth to a baby boy, but he died just 2 weeks later. The doctors said he was born too early, and they didn't have the medical knowledge to save him back then. Phyllis was only 28 years old, and this tragedy broke her heart into pieces. The pain didn't stop there. She suffered miscarriage not long after, and over the next 10 years, she would go through 6 pregnancies. Only 5 of her children survived to grow up. During this incredibly difficult time, she was still working, still trying to hold her family together, and still pretending that everything was fine. By the early 1950s, Phyllis had 5 children under the age of 10. Sherwood was still refusing to work steady jobs, even wasting a $10,000 inheritance that could have saved their family from poverty. They were so poor that they had to use food stamps and could barely afford powdered milk for the children. In 1952, things got even worse. They were kicked out of their home because they couldn't pay $300 in rent. Phyllis was working as a radio copywriter, making $75 a week, which was barely enough to survive. But this job gave her something special, a voice. She created a radio segment called Phyllis Diller, the Homely Friend Maker, where she made fun of housewife tips and daily life. Around this time, Sherwood kept pushing Phyllis to try performing on stage. She was terrified, but she finally agreed to try. Her first real show was at a veterans hospital, and it was a disaster. The patients heckled her while she played piano, and she felt humiliated. But instead of giving up, she turned that humiliation into fuel for something bigger. Then came March 7th, 1955, the day that changed everything. Phyllis was 37 years old when she walked onto the stage at San Francisco's Purple Onion nightclub. She wasn't trying to be glamorous or beautiful like other female performers. Instead, she made fun of her looks, her cooking, and her chaotic life. She joked that her food was so bad it could kill you. The audience couldn't stop laughing. What was supposed to be a short gig turned into an 89-week run that lasted almost 2 years. The club made over $100,000 from her shows, though Phyllis only earned $100 a week. But this success led to television appearances and launched her career. In 1956, Phyllis created a stage look that would make her unforgettable. She wore wild horsehair wigs, painted her face with exaggerated makeup, carried a long cigarette holder even though she barely smoked, and wore clashing clothes that made her look ridiculous on purpose. She was almost 40 years old and knew she had to stand out in a world that usually only celebrated young, beautiful women. Her strategy worked perfectly. Her bookings increased by 40% almost instantly, and she started appearing on national television shows. She collected over 50 wigs, each costing $50 to $100, and her signature cigarette holder was 12 inches long and made of ivory. But here's what most people didn't know. Behind all the laughter and crazy outfits, Phyllis was hiding incredible pain. She created a fictional character called Fong to joke about her lazy husband, but these jokes were actually about her real marriage to Sherwood. She was turning her private heartbreak into public entertainment. In 1958, she released her first comedy album called The Lamb Fade in a Whorehouse, a title so shocking that some stores refused to sell it. But it sold over 50,000 copies in its first year and made her $10,000 in royalties. The album was recorded in a small Los Angeles studio with just 20 people watching, and Phyllis delivered her jokes at lightning speed, up to 200 words per minute. By 1959, she was touring nonstop, hitting over 150 venues and traveling 50,000 miles in 1 year alone. She made $25,000 that year, which was 3 times more than she had earned just 4 years earlier. She kept all her jokes organized in a steel cabinet. 50,000 handwritten jokes on index cards, sorted by topic. After every show, she would sit at her typewriter and write 100 new jokes every single week. The success was incredible, but it came at a cost. She once collapsed from exhaustion after driving for 48 hours straight between shows. Even then, she kept going. In 1961, Phyllis appeared on The Jack Paar Show and changed television forever. She was 43 years old, had 5 kids, came from a broken marriage, and had only been doing comedy for a few years. Most people would have given up, but she stood under those bright studio lights with her wild wig and long cigarette holder, shaking so badly from nerves that she could barely hold a microphone. But she didn't give up. She made her struggles a joke, calling herself ugly before anyone else could and talking about her chaotic home life in ways that made people laugh out loud. There was no woman like her on television, not one. That appearance launched her into stardom and opened doors for comedians like Roseanne Barr, who would later say that Phyllis changed her life. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, Phyllis appeared on dozens of television shows, starred in her own sitcoms, and became a regular on game shows like Hollywood Squares. She went on tours with Bob Hope to entertain soldiers during the Vietnam War, released multiple comedy albums, and even tried Broadway. But during all of this success, Phyllis was carrying a secret that was breaking her heart every single day. In 1944, she had given birth to her daughter Sally. For the first few years, Sally seemed like a normal, happy child. But by the 1950s, something was clearly wrong. Sally started showing signs of a serious mental illness that doctors would later diagnose as schizophrenia. In those days, mental illness wasn't understood the way it is today. Families were often ashamed and kept these conditions completely secret. Phyllis tried for years to care for Sally at home while dealing with her own crumbling marriage and the demands of raising 4 other children. Around 1960, When Sally was about 16 years old, Phyllis made one of the most difficult decisions any mother could ever make. She placed Sally in institutional care at a mental health facility. This wasn't because she didn't love Sally. It was because Sally needed professional help that Phyllis couldn't provide at home. And here's where the real secret begins. For the next 33 years, from 1960 to 1993, Phyllis drove to that institution every single week to visit Sally. Every week, without fail, no matter how busy her career became, no matter how many shows she had to perform, no matter where she was touring the world, she always came back for Sally. Think about this for a moment. Phyllis was one of the most famous comedians in America. She was constantly traveling, performing hundreds of shows per year, appearing on television, making movies, and recording albums. But every single week, she found time to visit her daughter. She never talked about Sally in interviews. She never mentioned her in her comedy routines. She never used her daughter's condition for sympathy or publicity. She kept this part of her life completely private because she wanted to protect Sally's dignity and privacy. During these weekly visits, Phyllis would sit with Sally, talk to her, bring her gifts, and try to maintain some kind of mother-daughter connection despite Sally's illness. Sometimes Sally recognized her, and they could have conversations. Other times, Sally was lost in her own world and barely knew her mother was there. Can you imagine how heartbreaking this must have been? Here was a woman who made millions of people laugh every week, but she spent her private moments sitting quietly with a daughter who was trapped inside a mental illness that stole away so much of who she could have been. The visits continued through Phyllis's divorce from Sherwood in 1965, through her disastrous second marriage to Ward Donovan that lasted only 22 weeks, through all her career highs and lows, through her own health problems, and through the deaths of other family members. In the 1970s and 1980s, Phyllis's career was at its peak. She was making hundreds of thousands of dollars per year, living in a mansion in Brentwood, and was one of the most recognizable faces on television. But every week, she still drove to see Sally. She never complained about these visits. She never asked for credit or recognition for her dedication. She simply did what she believed a mother should do. She never abandoned her child, no matter how difficult the situation became. The secret became even more heartbreaking when you consider what else Phyllis was dealing with during these years. In 1998, her son Peter died of cancer at age 53. In 2002, her daughter Stephanie died of a stroke at just 54 years old. By the time Phyllis passed away in 2012, she had outlived 4 of her 6 children. But through all of this tragedy, she kept visiting Sally. She kept performing. She kept making people laugh while her own heart was breaking over and over again. Sally died in 1993 at the age of 49, after spending most of her adult life in institutional care. For Phyllis, this meant that the weekly visits that had defined her life for over 3 decades finally came to an end. But instead of feeling relief, she felt a different kind of heartbreak. The grief of losing a daughter she had never stopped loving, despite all the challenges of Sally's illness. After 1993, friends and family members noticed that something changed in Phyllis. She had always been driven and hardworking, but now she seemed to work even more frantically. She took on more shows, more appearances, more projects. It was as if she was trying to fill the empty space that those weekly visits to Sally had occupied for so many years. Some people wondered why Phyllis never retired. She was in her 70s and 80s, had earned enough money to live comfortably, and had health problems that should have slowed her down. But she kept working, kept performing, kept pushing herself to make people laugh. Now we understand why. Those weekly visits to see Sally had given Phyllis's life a sense of purpose beyond her career. They had been her way of expressing love and devotion in a world that didn't always understand mental illness. When Sally died, Phyllis lost more than a daughter. She lost a routine that had kept her grounded for decades. In her final years, Phyllis finally began to open up about some of her struggles. In her 2005 memoir, she wrote about losing her infant son in 1945 and some of the other tragedies she had faced. But even then, she was careful about how much she revealed about Sally's condition. Phyllis understood that mental illness carried a stigma that could hurt not only her career, but also Sally's memory. She chose to protect her daughter's privacy even after death. which shows the depth of her love and respect for Sally as a person, not just as someone with an illness. The story of Phyllis Diller and her daughter Sally teaches us something incredible about love, sacrifice, and the hidden struggles that people face. Here was a woman who built her career on making fun of her own life, but the most important part of her life, her relationship with her daughter Sally, was something she kept sacred and private. She never used Sally's condition for sympathy or to explain away her own problems. She never made Sally's illness part of her comedy routine. She simply loved her daughter quietly, consistently, and completely for over 30 years. This secret also explains so much about Phyllis's comedy. Her jokes about family chaos, difficult children, and the challenges of motherhood weren't just funny observations. They were coming from a woman who understood more about parenting struggles than most people could imagine. When Phyllis made jokes about her crazy household or her difficult kids, audiences laughed because they thought she was exaggerating for comic effect. They had no idea that her real life included challenges far more serious than anything she talked about on stage. The fact that she could turn her pain into laughter for others while keeping her deepest struggles private shows an incredible strength of character. She gave joy to millions of people while carrying a burden that would have crushed many others. Phyllis Diller died on August 20th, 2012, at the age of 95. She passed away peacefully in her sleep at her Brentwood home, and her manager said she died with a smile on her face. She was cremated and her ashes were scattered at sea, just as she had requested. Only after her death did the full story of her weekly visits to Sally begin to emerge. Family members and close friends finally felt comfortable sharing this part of Phyllis's life, helping the world understand the incredible woman behind the wild wigs and cackling laugh. Today, we remember Phyllis Diller as one of the greatest comedians who ever lived. She broke barriers for women in comedy, influenced countless performers, and brought laughter to millions of people around the world. But perhaps her greatest achievement wasn't anything she did on stage. It was a quiet, consistent love she showed to a daughter who needed her for over 30 years. The secret that Phyllis Diller kept hidden from her fans teaches us that the people who make us laugh often carry the heaviest burdens. Behind every joke was a woman who understood pain, loss, and sacrifice in ways that most of us can't imagine. She showed us that it's possible to be strong and vulnerable at the same time, to be public and private, to be funny and heartbroken, and to give everything to your career while still having enough left over to love someone who couldn't love you back in a conventional way. Phyllis Diller's greatest secret wasn't really a secret at all. It was love. Pure, unconditional, never-ending love for a daughter who needed it more than the world needed another laugh. And in keeping that love private and protected, Phyllis showed us what it really means to be a mother, a comedian, and a human being. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more untold stories about the people who shaped our world. And remember, behind every smile, there might be a story of incredible strength that we never get to see.